I like tacos. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our, season 8, episode 6, the Iron Throne review and analysis. Sorry, we're a little bit late this time. It's about 2 weeks overdue. But anyways, here we are, joined once again by my favorite people. So introduce yourselves and say hello and goodbye to everybody.
Well, I'll just start by saying the reason it's so overdue, at least on my part, is due to the overwhelming apathy that I feel to this awful, awful conclusion. And that's the only introduction that I need.
Don't start lying to people. That's not why we're late.
It's why I'm late.
No, it's not. Okay. And that's
I am DJ.
Calum, everybody. Yeah, and that's DJ.
Yeah, I'm wearing my advice to Dan and Dave shirt today. I'm just letting them know they need to just get away, just run.
Mm-hmm. And hi, I'm Clare. I suppose you're right. The real reason is some of us needed a couple of weeks just to let things kind of sink in, try and rationalize the finale. Yeah, I'm Clare, and this is our last review, which is quite sad, really, in a way, particularly because I just didn't expect it to end this way. But yeah, that's me. Hello.
One small preliminary point. Although it's our last review of Game of Thrones, we have had discussions privately, which have led to the conclusion that we will be doing further videos on the books. Both the books that have already been released and also, of course, Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. And if we're all still alive by the time the prequel comes out, then we'll also be doing that.
I wouldn't mind discussing. I know not all of you have read it, but it's an easy read. Fire and Blood. I wouldn't mind having a couple of discussions about Fire and Blood in the context of the world history. It's
Agreed.
Interesting.
Yep.
I haven't even bought that yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's easy to get through. Once you pick it up and start reading it, it's like to be honest, it's nothing that you haven't really heard before, but just those stories, those stories and legends in a lot more detail. It's really good, really enjoyable.
And it's from when to when?
It's from the first Targaryen, the Conquest, right up until there's 2 volumes of it, and this is the first volume.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really good. The way it's written is really good, and it does give quite a few clues to some of the things that might be happening from the kind of magical side of things in the current books. But yeah, anyway, before we completely go off on a tangent, has everybody introduced themselves?
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Okay, so let's just have a quick run through for all of us. DJ is going to kind of lead the discussion in terms of the scenes and the progression of this particular episode. Because I've only watched it once. I think Calum's only watched it once. So DJ is our expert in that sense. But before we start going through that, let's just have a roundup of what score. This is going to be difficult, but what score you would give this episode out of 5, links on the Meister's chain, and also just in a sentence, if you can sum up how you feel after the end, just generally how you feel. So I'll start by saying 2 links. I think I've given it higher scores in previous discussions that I've had. The more I think about it, the more I think that those 2 scores mainly are for the cast and the crew. Certainly not everything else is taken out of it, like the progression and the pacing and just things not making sense at the end. And yeah, the timing of things mainly was an issue for me. And that's how I feel generally about the last episode. I kind of felt as though, just looking back now from what I can remember, it was a bit of a boring finale. There was lots of walking around corridors and staring out onto the vista, and it was just like the two main things that I can remember are Daenerys being stabbed and then the whole Bran's moot thing. Those are the two main things that I can remember from the episode. But yeah, be quite disappointed overall, but we'll get into the reasons why.
That was a long sentence.
Yeah, sorry. Well,
No, but I was see what I'm thinking is, although it was an enjoyable and long monologue, we can't complain because, of course, 95% of the people in the comments are only here for your analysis anyway. So the more you talk, the better it is. Right, as for me,
not true. That's not true.
That's what jealousy sounds like, Claire.
no, but seriously, in terms of my links, in the context of Game of Thrones as a show, it has to be 1 for me. In the context of TV shows in general, it's probably a 2 or a 3. But in a sentence, the reason why my score is so low is because they have, seemingly on purpose, sacrificed sense for shock. And that for me is a very large sin in terms of production, whether it be for TV shows, movies, or literature.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, Calum. Yeah. DJ?
Yeah, so I think this was the best episode that's ever been of all time. I'm not just saying that to get Calum's goat. Definitely not that. No. So I sort of went into this episode thinking it was going to be disappointing. It's an ending, so it's going to be disappointing no matter what, because it's sad to see one of your favorite shows end. I guess how I felt overall, I'll give my links in a second, was it was actually a little better than I originally expected it to be. It doesn't mean it was great by any stretch. I would go. I think I'm in the same camp as Claire with a 2. Maybe pushing a 3. How about this? I'll say this: the first half of it, up to Dany being stabbed, I thought was a 3. The epilogue is when it dropped down for me. Like that epilogue portion of the episode is when it dropped down. But there were some really good parts of the episode, and then there was some really atrocious parts of the episode, and then there was mostly just in between. There was somewhere in the meh region for most of the episode. So I would say between a 2 and a 3. Yeah.
Right.
By the way, I just want to point out that although I am not nearly as upset as, say, Calum is at the episode, I think every criticism has pretty much been fair. It's not that I don't think the criticisms are fair. I guess I expected the ending to be somewhat disappointed, maybe.
Yeah. I think I'm in the ballpark of a 3. I'd almost give it more if I could, but I can't. I didn't mind it. I thought they did a good job just wrapping it up. I am disappointed in it. I thought it could have been done so much better, but at the same point, from what this season was, I felt like they wrapped it up as good as they possibly could. I mean, I know, Calum, you said they sacrificed sense for shock. I mean, I don't think Dany getting stabbed was really a shock to any of us. I think we all saw that coming at that point.
That wasn't what I was referring to.
All right, I would like you to elaborate on that later on for sure. But yeah, I think I would give it a 3. I've always been partial to how things wrap up and getting to know where people go after the story's over and sort of envision what their life is like. Definitely some stuff that I didn't like for sure. Lots of it. But yeah, no, I didn't mind it as much as other people, I don't think.
Yeah, one thing I will say about this episode is it seems really derisive. Like there seems to be a lot of mixed reactions between fans. Like I know a bunch of people who were like, "Yeah, I mean, it was fine. You know, it was a fine ending," and then a lot of people who are really upset by it. So nobody seems to be thrilled with it, but
No.
yeah, it seems to be pretty mixed in that regard. Oh, Cal, you're muted.
One thing I would say, thank you. One thing I would say is, although the IMDb is by no means a perfect representation of how good a movie or TV show is, I don't think that it can be ignored just because of the difference between seasons. If you look at seasons 1 through 7, I don't have the data to hand, but I'm fairly certain the average across the board for all of the previous seasons was a 9. And then the average for season 8 was, I think, 6. And we're talking 6 figures in terms of how many people have reviewed these. So this is not a small sum of people by any stretch.
That's a very telling stat. Yeah, for sure.
These people aren't critics. They're not experts. They're just the average guy or the average girl who has sat down to watch the show, and they've felt strongly enough about it to go on and rate it whatever they deemed it to be worthy. And again, to DJ's point very quickly, the notion that the show's finishing so that there's always going to be some kind of sour taste, I completely agree. Even when a show is wrapped up perfectly, if it's as good as Game of Thrones is, there's always going to be that sadness that it's at an end. However, that being said, I don't think that is and I'm not saying that you do, by the way, but I don't think that is the prevailing issue here. I don't think it's the principal issue. If you compare it with the ending of Breaking Bad, for example, or Lord of the Rings, although you're sad that the story is over, I think that those stories elicit more satisfaction to punctuate the bitterness rather than pure bitterness, as I have experienced.
I think I can understand why the casual show watcher would be disappointed and confused, and I can certainly understand why in-depth nerdy book readers like us would also be a bit fed up with it. But let me just ask you this question before we get into more of a deep dive of the episode. If you think of the finale, because we're focusing on this finale episode really, but in the context of the rest of season 8, would you say this was the worst episode? Would you say
no?
Where would you put this episode in terms of ranking the 6?
I think I'd put it 3rd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's what I'd say. I'd say episode 2 was far and above the best episode of the season.
Yeah, I think so.
Principally because it actually stuck to the roots of Game of Thrones, i.e., 2 or 3 characters in a room building towards something serious. And that's a serious issue here, because the writers stripped themselves of the ability to actually round this off nicely and in a way that Game of Thrones deserved, because they didn't give themselves enough time to actually set up the shocking moments that they had planned or they were informed of by George. And I think episode 2 was the only example of them actually trying to do that. Alas, they couldn't. Imagine if we had kind of 6 or 7 of that type of episode, more than we did, to set up these different scenes that we're seeing, rather than just kind of shoving it on you straight away. As for the order, very, very quickly. So episode 2, number 1, then episode 1, episode 5, and then the rest are just at the bottom together. Episode 3 and episode 6 were both terrible in terms of story.
DJ, where would you put this finale episode in the context of the rest of the season? Would you say it was the worst?
No, it definitely wasn't the worst.
Uh-huh.
You're in tough company vying for last place with the Battle of Winterfell to me, and the one where what's his name? Rhaegal gets shot down. Those are the contenders there. No, I believe that was 4, Calum. 5 was when Dany blew up all of King's Landing.
5 was the bells.
So I would say that I would agree that I would say number 2 and number 5 to me are on the top. So I would put this around 3rd. Yeah.
And you, Claire?
Yeah, I think I broadly agree with what DJ's just said, I think, and Calum as well. Excuse me. 2 is definitely my favourite. 1, I can barely remember. Three could have been. Yeah, I'm disappointed in the entire season, really, and I think it's moved from. For me, it's moved from. No, that's wouldn't happen. They've just invented that. And the two main things I think that people overall generally are pissed off about are the turnaround with Daenerys and Bran being king at the end. Those are the two main things that people seem to have a massive amount of beef with.
I think you could add Jon to that list as well. Jon's character agency being completely removed. But sorry, continue.
Yeah, but I think
mostly what I hear is Bran. I don't even hear other stuff. People just hated Bran being king. That's what I hear.
But I think it's moved for me from it being completely implausible and that wouldn't happen to, okay, right, I can see maybe how that would happen, but it wouldn't be written like that in the books. It would make much more sense. It would be much more.
There would
plausible.
be foreshadowing. There would be
yeah. So I've kind of
There
gone,
is foreshadowing.
Well, yeah,
like,
in the books.
This is a completely different story to the books. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it really isn't. Maybe that's how it happened with Daenerys and Bran.
Well, you know what? Let me. I wanted
wouldn't be like that in
I
the
wanted
book.
to save some questions for the end, but we might as well just because we're hovering around that. Because I had a friend, my buddy Dan, ask me if we think. He asked me to ask you guys specifically: will Bran be on the throne at the end of the books?
I can go on this if anyone else.
Sure.
Here's what I think in terms of the meta end game, in terms of the books and the show. I think maybe not all, the vast majority of major plot points in this season have been given directly from George. In my view, I think George has given them an outline of the ending for each major character, with the exception being Arya killing the Night King, because, of course, as far as I know, there's no Night King in the books. And that was ridiculous in any event. But the problem is that George, as DJ alluded to just now, has, at present moment, he has written or expects to write 3,000 manuscript pages before this is concluded. So whether or not, because of that, rather, he will wrap up the story in the same way, but it'll build to it very differently. The show tried to cram everything into 6 hours, or maybe 14, if you count season 7. Whereas again, George will have a lot more time and a lot more pages to build towards these conclusions, which will therefore increase the satisfaction that they provide.
Or so we hope, at least.
Well,
But yeah, I agree that it's more likely, certainly.
I would.
Go ahead.
They are just quite quick, I think, really. But I would just to say hello to DJ's friend. Hi. My answer to that question would be: is Bronn going to end up on the throne at the end? I think it's
not Bronn.
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh my God! Let's not even talk about Bronn yet. I got some thoughts on that.
Bronn got what he wanted. Bronn got it. Maybe that's why I'm getting confused. But no, Bronn. Will Bran
the only happy ending?
Will Bran end up on the throne at the end? And I think it's not too much of a stretch to think about in the books and in the TV show. It all begins with Bran. It would be a nice full circle if everything ends with Bran. There are lots of things that Aziz from History of Westeros on Facebook this week saying, actually, if you go back and read the first couple of chapters in the book,
it's all in the Bran's first chapter when he climbs the roof of Winterfell, and he runs up one side of it, goes all the way around, and comes back on the same level. It's already written down. I've talked about this.
The fact that he was called, the fact that he's referred to as Prince quite a lot, and the prince that was promised.
How about the Weirwood throne?
Yeah, and also he was told that he would never walk again, but he would fly. And we all thought that meant lots of different things, him flying a dragon, him skin changing, warging, whatever. But actually, maybe what it meant was you'll fly to you'll be elevated to this position. But I think it will be very different. It kind of was suggested a little bit in the final episode about there being a slightly different way of choosing future kings and queens and monarchy. You know, it was made very clear that Bran couldn't have children. So I suppose that is a kind of way of somehow breaking the wheel, which, or at least changing the wheel rather than smashing it to pieces like Daenerys did. Yeah, that would be my. I'm not surprised that it's Bran, and I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case in the books as well. But I think it will just be in a different context.
Well, it wasn't set up in the show. Is the principal issue?
Yeah,
I think that's what it all boils down to. Is just quite simply the show has used George's ending without adapting his setup towards that ending.
He must be really pissed off about that. I mean, it not only is it confused, it just doesn't. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't. There was no setup really for it in the TV show, and if anything, if you look back, all of the, you know, I'm not Bran anymore. I don't really want anything. I don't want to be Lord. And then, that horrible cheesy line that he comes out with. Well,
why do you think I came down here? Yeah.
Yeah,
Why
and
did
it's
you
like,
think I traveled all this way?
Yeah.
Especially when you consider the fact that in the same season he states expressly that he doesn't want any more.
Yeah,
and that he's not a human being and all this nonsense.
Well, to be fair, in defense,
and when the throne's offered, he certainly wanted that.
in defense of that, he actually explicitly says, and I know because you only watched it the one time, but there's a point where Tyrion says, "I don't want to be hand," and Bran says, "I don't want to be king." So it's not that he wants to; it's that he feels there is some need
Benefit.
to be right.
Yeah.
It's to me. I think a lot of the complaints here, first of all, as far as alluding to the fact that he's going to be king is a totally valid criticism.
About whether he deserves it.
Well, it's not that. For me, a lot of people thought he was some kind of conniving Littlefinger character because he did this. But to me, it seems the impression I got was, he's seeing all the patterns and the cycles laid out, and he's saying this is the best option for everyone, right? Because if everything goes this way and I land in the Iron Throne, or whatever, not the Iron Throne anymore, but if I land as king, this is the best chance we have at a new type of world and peace and all that stuff. That's how I viewed that.
He's like the ultimate empath, so he has everybody's best interest at heart, not just his family, not just this family.
He has no desire
Everybody.
for he doesn't have the same greed. He doesn't care about money, women, whatever, all that stuff. He just wants peace.
I think that's a fair point. Do you think an issue might crop up in terms of the fact that we've been given more and more evidence to suggest that Bran can, in some capacity, see into the future? So the idea that he gave Arya the dagger at the very spot at which she used it, the idea that he said, why do you think I traveled all this way? And there's countless others that I'm very easily forgetting.
I don't think so. I think he uses his knowledge and being able to see into the past, because he said, I live mainly in the past now. But I think he's able to navigate that more, where he can perhaps go back to a specific time if he needs to, or he can find things.
Yeah,
we've seen.
I don't think he can see in the future. I think he's had visions of the future.
Right, okay.
But I think his ability is to be able to go into the past and for that to inform his choices for the future.
Well, you may have noticed, I've said this a few times in the past few episodes of Bran, is the way I view this is, if you can see enough past events, you'll see the cycles and the patterns in a way that can inform. I mean, how do we make decisions in the real world, right? Is we base it on past events and our knowledge of past events, right?
Yeah.
So it's to me, I've viewed it recently as him sort of noticing those patterns and being able to pick out what he can do to subtly bring patterns to flow in a certain way. That's
okay. Quite frankly, I agree with both of those points. And I think that it's very, very likely to be the case that is veracious. But what I'm saying is that it has been written in a way which suggests, whether it's true or not, it suggests that he can in some capacity see into the future.
Mm.
And therefore it leads to the criticism that he is in some way complicit because he has the chance to see Daenerys's actions. I'm not saying this is what I think, but I'm saying that this is a conclusion that is arguable based on the writing. Okay, so but by setting it all into motion and by watching it happen and refusing to do anything, as he has the entire season, he is in effect another kind of element of that madness and that tyranny
But
because he's allowed it.
Well, what do you mean
yeah,
he refused to do anything?
Well, there's two potential interpretations. Firstly, he hasn't done anything in season 8. I think up until the finale, his most memorable line was discussing, historic wheelchair inventions. So that's the first interpretation. The second interpretation depends upon, or is predicated on your belief that Bran can actually see into the future in some capacity, which again, I agree with your arguments that he can't, but it's been written in a way that suggests he can.
Well, he did use himself as bait for the Night King. That's doing something. I mean, Bran can't do much. He's paralyzed.
Well, he can speak. This is the thing. Words are a lot more powerful than actions.
All right, I think I can take this on. So I think going back to what I was saying about, for instance, if he had spoken up beforehand and say he went to Jon and he said, by the way, your girlfriend's crazy and she's going to destroy King's Landing, what impact is that going to have on Jon? Because you saw how hard it was to convince Jon to do what he did, even after he saw what Daenerys did. If this is my interpretation of this, when you see that, Bran says it has to play out like this. It's the only way that it ends like that. It's the only way Jon is actually going to do this, and it's the only way to really get her out of power in that way. So is he complicit? He's complicit in the same way that, in the sense that he allowed it to happen because he thought that it was the best way to get to a better conclusion.
But that makes him just as bad as Dany because that was her justification. She
You're
was
right.
saying all of these people have to die so that a new leader can be born.
Except I completely agree. Except this, if Bran really can see into the future, what if he sees that other alternatives are actually worse and destroy more people in more places than that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult issue because obviously we're working with theories. We don't know what Bran's powers are because it wasn't expressly.
We'll definitely get more in the books. Yeah, like if we
sure.
see these powers, I mean, we're gonna have a much better understanding of what he's actually doing.
Yeah,
Right now, I think he's like Jojen. If he can see into the future, it's visions that need to be interpreted. It's not seeing this is going to happen. This is going to happen. It's, the ocean coming over the walls of Winterfell and Bran and Rickon being burned alive, which Jojen got wrong because Bran's obviously still alive. So it's interpretation. I don't think he can.
In season 4 or 5, I think it's 4. It could even be 3 actually. In one of the earlier seasons, anyway, when Bran visits the Three-Eyed Raven, he receives a vision, and it's the vision in which we see the Mad King saying, "Burn them all." And another kind of element to that vision is a dragon flying over King's Landing.
Yes, there you go. That's a vision. Yeah. It's not a fact. And also,
well, that could have been.
They're not the exact same thing. They're not the one that Bran saw back in season 3 or whatever. Isn't the same vision or version of the shadow going over King's Landing. They're two different shots.
Yeah, I was using that as an example of something that needs to be interpreted, as you said.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, right. I was going to throw this. I think it applies to both Bran and. Not that I'm letting the writers off by any means whatsoever, but just throwing this in there. That that famous quote from Albert Einstein, insanity, or in this case, madness, is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results, expecting a different outcome. So you could look at Bran just sitting there and doing nothing as being informed by the past, knowing that, whatever happens here, the chances are Daenerys, Wake the Dragon, she's a Targaryen, they're barbaric. So there may be some link to what he's seen in the past with the Mad King, and also that could be the same. That could be said for Daenerys. She's doing the same thing over and over again. And I mean, it's slightly different with Daenerys in that incredible amount of grief and loss fuels what happens to her. Even though I still think, in no way, shape, or form did we get a good lead up to that making any sense, really. But I think from Bran's perspective, yes, he was informed by the past, knowing that it doesn't matter if you try and change this thing or that thing or whatever, it's going to have the same results. The best I can possibly do in this situation is try to maneuver certain things, but that I don't think that necessarily means that he's evil or he was manipulative or he was trying to place things into a certain,
it wasn't like a Machiavellian
no, I don't
approach
think
to it.
so. And as Catherine said from House Polished, why wouldn't it be the magical boy sat on the Iron Throne or being the king at the end of the story? That kind of, in a way, makes sense. It's the boy with magic. So
I've got kind of a cool point you guys might like to jump off of here, which is obviously, because this is mentioned throughout the show, but even in this episode specifically, many times they mentioned the wheel, which of course is a symbol of this cycle, which goes back to what Bran can see in the past. He sees these cycles happening over and over again. Daenerys is saying, I want to break the wheel. Who ended up actually breaking the wheel, if it really is Bran maneuvering these things in places or whatever, technically he's the one that actually broke the wheel, because the wheel in the cycle is just, people hurt other people, and those people hurt other people because of that, right? And that's the cycle. That's the cycle he was trying to break.
Humanity's way of doing things, informed by history and experiences and stories and legends and the Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the wheel is such a key symbol here for this particular plot. I really think that's. Yeah,
I agree.
We ended up with two wheels on the throne.
That again?
Oh,
gotcha.
I thought I was the one who made wheelchair jokes, Calum. That's not cool.
Yeah.
No. What's the first scene?
Well, I mean, that's got to be put in there for a reason, right? Like the fact that Bran gets himself a wheelchair built for him, or the horse riding chair.
Yeah.
All right, we want to hop into actual scenes now?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Scene one, I guess we'll do up to, so the opening scene is Tyrion, Jon, Davos walking into King's Landing after the destruction. I would say, why don't we go up to this point, followed by Tyrion finding Jaime and Cersei, and Jon stopping Grey Worm, trying to stop Grey Worm from killing the Lannister guards. That's that sequence, that whole sequence.
I've got a question, and feel free to say no to this, because I'm happy either way. Would you guys prefer to do it scene by scene or character by character?
Well, I'll tell you what, let's do a hybrid of both. So in this one, let's discuss Cersei and Jaime, and also Grey Worm and what happens with the Unsullied.
Right. Yeah. Well, the reason I say that is because a lot of the characters' progression kind of transcends a single scene. So it's kind of, you would struggle to, let's say if I want to talk about Jon Snow, for example, his story is kind of fragmented throughout the episode. So I'd struggle to kind of stop where the scene ends, and But in terms of the
true,
let's discuss Jon and Daenerys in more detail when we get to that scene between them.
Sure.
So
I think that's.
So why don't we discuss? So do we want to discuss Tyrion finding Jaime and Cersei up to the point where he quits being Hand, or?
I mean, let me go first, and I think I'll be able to do both of those things. So in terms of the scene, I think, again, this is another example of them spending lots and lots of time in like slow shots of people walking around. And I know that it's about building the atmosphere, and like it's all very kind of post-apocalyptic, but I think this just from John's perspective, he just does not. He just doesn't seem to have a clue what to do next, really, and it needs Tyrion to kind of really sort of push him in the right direction. I think when they come across the Unsullied and Grey Worm, I mean, yeah, he's grief stricken. I understand that he's grief stricken, but there's a lot in this episode where I just think there's not a particularly satisfying end, or certain things don't make a massive amount of sense. And the whole Grey Worm and Unsullied thing for me, just the fact that suddenly he becomes a sailor at the end and he gets away. I wanted a satisfying end to Grey Worm where there was an end, a definitive end.
I got a bit to say on Grey Worm too, so we'll see how well
he does
we
have a
can
definitive
play.
end.
Well, he's gonna get butterflied in Narth. I know that.
The Unsullied are all dead.
Yeah, the whole of the Unsullied. But it just felt like it felt like they were in the writers.
That was alluded to, by the way, going to Narth.
Yeah. It just kind of did feel though that the writers were sort of right. Okay, Unsullied. Oh no, and the Dothraki. What do we? And it just didn't. I think they could have done a lot more to wrap up those type of story arcs. When it comes to, I know a lot of people have said the scene with Cersei and Jaime, why it defies logic that they weren't 5 feet away from that on the map where there seemed to be absolutely no rubble whatsoever. Suspending your disbelief in terms of how they've managed the scenery, I couldn't really have imagined any other way than those two going out together like that. They came into the world together. This is alluded to all the way through the books. There's some kind of psychic link there with both of them when it comes to the beginning of their life and the end of their life. So there's something really quite poetic about what happened. I think sets that I can somehow set that aside from how massive elements of Jaime's story arc were just trashed and the whole Jaime and Brienne thing, whatever. But when it comes to just Cersei and Jaime, she was so. What else could she have done? In that, a lot of people complained about, Cersei just staring out of windows and what she couldn't do anything else. She was so deluded that she was frozen until Jaime came and saved her, and then they died together. And it was like that was kind of a satisfactory end to me. And yeah, we kind of had to see, just for Tyrion's own peace of mind, what happened to my brother and my sister. Did they manage to get away? I provided them with an escape route, and he's confronted with it. The way that he reacted to that, and Peter Dinklage, just absolutely, just a really
very powerful,
a beautiful scene from a poetic sense, from a cinematography, does it make sense, blah 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 kind of sense. Then no, but you just have to look at these things separately now, unfortunately. Yeah, so that's my take on that first scene and those characters.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
I think arguably the prophecy did come true, and the fact that Cersei was so frozen, is she suffocating? And it's Tyrion that told her joys. It was like Tyrion's prophecy: your joy is going to turn to ashes in your mouth, which essentially it did. And Jaime coming to her, I agree with you. It's kind of poetic and meant to be that way. They came in together. They're going to go out together. Will it be different I think it has to be different in the books somehow. Although, again, I believe from the books, your joy will turn to ashes is from the books as well.
Yep.
Do we know that? Yeah.
It
okay.
is. It is.
Yeah.
So that also is maybe a little bit telling on what's going to happen in King's Landing at the end. Anyways, but yeah, I think her story, like the book prophecy, kind of in a way did come true. It's just the hands around her throat, but maybe they're her own. I don't know. But I liked it.
Well, the hands around her throat could be interpreted as being her choking, like her being constricted, not being able to move.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
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 Well, the hand could be Tyrion, the hand of the queen,
Yeah.
now the hand of the king. This is his third time that he's been hand.
An
I
experienced
think,
member of the.
yeah, I
Yeah.
just think it was like Tyrion's and Cersei's version of the prophecy both fittingly came true in the end. I know it's not what anybody expected, but I still, and I do love the meme about Bran being the younger, more beautiful one to take the throne. That's hilarious.
One piece of criticism that I don't agree with, which I've seen quite ubiquitously, is that Jaime should have been redeemed. He should have completed his redemption arc. Here's what I'd say: redemption arcs aren't satisfying if everyone completes them. Some people, and therefore some characters, simply can't redeem themselves. They don't have it in them. Let me
I don't.
And the reason, and here's how you separate a failed arc in a good way from a failed arc in a bad way. There has to be a reason that's been building in that character as to why he failed to so-called redeem himself. And as has already been alluded to, his connection with Cersei and that kind of unbridled, really powerful love that he shares with her is a convincing and satisfactory way by which he fails to satisfy the arc.
I see that completely differently. I see that as it's not about whether or not he's capable of redeeming himself. I think he is 100%. I think
he already has. He already has.
It's whether or not people will ever forgive him for what he did, and that's the same in real life. In like some of the people that I work with in my job have done certain things that are so bad that whatever they do, they will never be able to be forgiven by other people for certain things that they did. So it's how other people treat you. And I think that is what he knows, and that's what will always ultimately drive him back into Cersei's arms, because with her it doesn't matter. It doesn't,
yeah,
whatever it was he did, it doesn't matter to her. That's his safe place emotionally with Cersei, because she's not, doesn't matter whether she forgives him or not. She doesn't care about that.
Well, and his starts off with the very beginning with Bran as well, the things he does for love. He's in love with Cersei. So just because like he did all the right steps once he was on his redemption arc, he became a better person, and he's still coming back to her a better person. He's like Cersei's good side of her conscience. He's Cersei's like angel on her shoulder, whereas Cersei's the devil on Jaime's. So I don't see anything wrong with him going to meet up with her again, because he has to go there and protect her. That's still him doing a good deed for the woman that he loves. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not like he's going to go save her and then all of a sudden become jackass Jaime again. I mean, he's a better person.
Yes, and you both make compelling and persuasive arguments, but the problem is, from my perspective, is that by his own admission, all of his misdeeds, all of his reprehensible pieces of conduct have arisen by virtue of his relationship with Cersei. And so therefore his separation therefrom was what allowed him to become the better person. And the argument is that I'm advancing is that by going back to Cersei, he reclaims or reoccupies that previous version of himself that was the cause of all of his misdeeds.
Let me.
And although he couldn't act on those misdeeds because he died, the point is that if they had survived, she may have led him to do further unforgivable things, as he already alluded to.
At the core of who they both are, both of them, and they said it several times in the show, and I think it wouldn't surprise me if it goes this way in the books, but the way they just kind of look at each other and say there is nobody else, just us.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to, because I haven't spoken on this particular part yet, but let's separate the ideas. I think I could separate this into two thoughts. One is redemption and the other is rehabilitation. And they are two separate things. Much like an addict, as Jaime acts like an addict when it comes to Cersei. it's the behavior is this, which is the further you get away from your addiction, the healthier mentally you become. But people do relapse. And that's basically what how Jamie's story ended, is he relapsed on his addiction. And there's no amount of redemption, nothing that you can do can really fortify you against your relapse in an addiction. So
I love that. I really, really appreciate that.
No, that was well stated. Yeah.
That's all I have for Jamie and Cersei.
Yeah.
Tyrion's reaction to seeing them, and we had to see that, I think, as a TV watching audience, was one of the best parts of the episode, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. You also
Peter
get
Dinklage. So good.
it's an interesting note. I mean, when we have the Starks dying, they're all alone, like by themselves. When Robb dies, or I guess Catelyn's technically with him, or Rickon dies, Jon's technically with him, but there you don't have that sort of emotion, that family like love that you see with Tyrion when he finds them, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, you don't get that with any of the Starks.
Can I let me ask you guys something, because this is from a lot of the casual watchers that I spoke with who were upset by this ending for Jamie and Cersei. I know a couple people who were upset with the way Jamie and Cersei's story ends. I personally liked it. I thought it was a great way to end their story. But one thing I heard a lot was Cersei didn't get what she deserved. To me, that seems sort of ridiculous, because this story has never been about people getting what they deserve in positive or negative direction, right? Did Ned Stark get what he deserved? So I thought that was sort of a silly.
Think what people genuinely think, as blood-boilingly gruesome as it is, they expected Daenerys to. Maybe it would have quelled the anger of killing everybody else in King's Landing if Daenerys had swooped in on Drogon and just roasted the shit out of Cersei as she stood there staring out of the window. I think that's what people are pissed off didn't happen. But it was a good. I thought it was.
Made me happy at all.
Yeah.
I'm much happier that what she had built up to crumbled, not only around her, but onto her. Nice. Personally, I think that is a much better ending. The way people have said this to me, it almost sounds like what they wanted to see her being tortured. And I think when I've heard this, it's like people are saying, well, she hurt other people, she tortured other people, therefore she deserves that. And I think that's a sort of sick mentality. Not only that, but I think, as I've stated before, that the story is about breaking the wheel. So if that's the case, if that's really what you want, then what you want is a continuation of the wheel.
I think you said it beautifully with the fact that everything that she built up crumbled down upon her. That's perfect. I love it. Yeah.
How about this all started to go really wrong for everybody when Jamie pushed Bran out of a building, and it ended with a building falling on top of both of them.
I like that.
It's a good comparison.
Can I quickly jump in on what Duncan said earlier about the Starks dying alone?
Who's Duncan?
MP.
I'm Frank.
About the Starks dying alone. Because I don't want to jump ahead too far, although I am going to, very briefly. Because of course, what Duncan's what MP is referring to there is the idea that the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. I assume is what you were going for there.
Sure.
Or at least that.
Do that. I would have come in there eventually.
Well, that's the thing, because of course that entire saying makes no sense now.
There's a lot of sayings that make no sense.
A total ton of shit that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, there's so much.
But we're here to identify it and roast it. So now all of the Starks are lone wolves. So it makes you wonder what their fate is being implied to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they're all separated now. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I had that thought at the end of this rewatch.
Mhm.
Only on my second watch was I did think about that particular quote and what that means. Honestly, I'm not sure that yeah, I mean if it happens this way in the books where they really all separate like that, that's really interesting because even in the books that line, the lone wolf dies and the pack
Mhm.
survives or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's like Ned's big advice to him is like stay together. And then they're like, ah, fuck this shit. Everybody,
Let's
yeah,
literally all separate.
yeah.
No, true.
It might be argued that that saying only applied to the world that they survived. So now that the world is a better place,
Mm.
in inverted commas, they don't require each other to be in close proximity anymore, and they can kind of go off and do their thing.
True.
And true.
Because
Also, if we're going book style here, they're all connected through the wolves, and I think they can almost like communicate with each other
maybe,
through the animals. Like the animals sense when something's happening to another animal even far away, if I'm remembering correctly.
yeah,
So maybe there's something there that ties them together a bit more, even though they're separated. If
mm.
they can tell if somebody's, having difficulty, and then, oh, okay, let's go find so and so. But
I'm curious if you guys think if will there be any in the books will there be any symmetry to the fact that Jon and Arya's wolves are still alive and Sansa's isn't, and whether that has something to do with whether Sansa will survive in the books or anything like that. Do you think there's a symmetry there, or is that really not that important? The fact that her wolf is dead and the other two are alive.
Well, I didn't think that, although I had a similar line of thinking, which is that both Jon and Arya's wolves are in the wild, as it were, where they belong,
yeah,
as are now Arya and Jon. Not sure how you'd apply that line of thinking to Sansa because, of course, hers is dead. But yeah.
yeah. Mine was I know we talked about it either last episode or a couple ago, but the wolves that died were the ones that were contained. They were tied up, and they weren't free. So that's why they died. But I don't know how that applies to whether or not Sansa will die.
Well, Sansa's the
Maybe.
only one. That's interesting because Sansa's the only one who almost um, seeked to be bound. Like she
Yeah,
wants to be bound by that
marriage through the night.
environment and
Yeah.
and being the Queen
Well,
of
I
Winterfell.
think that saying there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. I think probably Sansa fits the bill better than
Definitely.
anyone
Yeah.
to be like the chained wolf to
Mhm.
And there
Winterfell.
you go. She's bound to Winterfell. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
like it.
I think that. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Also, just a quick reminder: Summer is still alive in the books, correct?
Yeah,
In the books.
absolutely.
As a Shaggy Dog, as far as we know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're all alive except for Grey Wind and Lady.
Yeah.
They're all still kicking about. And by the way, I just wanted to, I never got a chance to, but as for Calum was mentioning that the Night King's not in the books, I feel like he's going to be, whether or not it's going to be titled the character of the Night King, but the White Walkers are going to have a leader of some sort. They're not just all, somebody's controlling them somehow.
Mm.
But I don't know if the title of that person will be the Night King, because I think that's like a total separate person.
Yeah.
I think
And they
it'll be
combine the Night King into the guy that the children did in the show, but the Night King in the books is like a different sort of
Well, ants
guy.
and bees have queens that control. They're like the hub. So
Sure, yeah.
I feel like the Night King in the show was just a neat, convenient TV device that can be used to kind of represent their leadership. In the books, I don't think it'll be so obvious. I think it'll be a bit more vague and mysterious as befits their order. But we'll see.
Yeah.
All
I'm saying is I do believe that there will be a leader of that force of beings, the White Walkers or the others.
Yeah.
All right,
Just
should we go?
to wrap up Claire's point on there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. I like how you applied it to Sansa,
Mhm.
but I think that also has White Walker connotations in the books, or the others' connotations in the books, which of course weren't played upon in the TV show. I can't recall to memory now, but there's been quite a few moments on my reread where I've kind of picked together the White Walkers and that particular line. There's just been a few connections I've made, which I'll find them for our next kind of book chapter review or whatever. But I do think that will be significant with regard to the end game of the others.
Yeah, that's kind of where my head's always been at too. Is the Stark in Winterfell is meant to stop that force? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a general, thought regarding that statement. I'm
I
pretty
think
sure.
it's something to do. This might be a common theory among book readers. It's something, at least for me, it's something to do with a pact that was made the first time around. The Starks are kind of the go-between between the living and the dead. To kind of have that intermediary, so it doesn't always have to, result in fighting and death. But again, that remains to be seen. So.
It does, but yeah, no, I'm fully on board with that line of thinking. That's my perception of it as well.
Next scene, or
Sure. I mean, yeah, we're sort of all over the place, which is fine. I think it's really the only way to do this justice.
Yeah, I agree.
As the show is sort of all over the place too. So, so, basically next, so we have Dany's Hitler speech, followed by Tyrion quitting, Jon and Tyrion discussing, Dany dying. I mean, we could sort of just roll this all into one, because it snowballed all into Dany dying. One thing I would like to note is there was definitely something being hinted at here as far as when it comes to Jon and Dany, the saying, when a Targaryen is born, you flip a coin and all this stuff. And I think that there was a message here about and in the book as a whole too, or in the series as a whole, is that there is actually nothing special about blood or family, in terms of there doesn't seem to be any magic to it. I know that might seem weird with the dragons, but Jon even says, do you think to Tyrion, do you think our house words are stamped on our bodies when we're born? And he said, if that's the case, then as a Targaryen, I should have brought fire and blood too, and all this stuff. And I'm just wondering if you guys think, with Melisandre, burning King's blood to make certain events happen, and that never really seemed to pan out for her. I'm wondering, is there actually anything special in blood, or is this just one of those self-fulfilling prophecy type things?
Well, there may be a link to the incestual nature of the Targaryens.
Well, that part's a given, I think.
Yeah, but that, of course, Jon kind of Jon's exempted from that, which might tie into why he wasn't so mad. But again, I think that's fairly basic in terms of interpretation. As for magic, I'm not convinced that there is. Other than whether or not, I suppose it depends on whether or not you think there's a special connection between the dragon and their rider that has some kind of magical properties, or whether or not they're simply tamed, similar to other wild beasts.
I've never been a fan of only Targaryens can ride the dragon logic or statements or anything. I think, I don't know, given like the Ice Dragon books and the fact that it's set seemingly in the same world and they had a different rider that wasn't Targaryen, I've never just followed that logic.
Well, not only that, but I think even in the book series, Balerion, the Black Dread, which is just as a reminder, the dragon that Aegon rode when he conquered King's Landing, survived him and had other riders after him. which means that it's at least possible. Which means there's at least not like a single connection, right? It is at the very least possible to forge a connection.
Yeah.
The question is whether or not that connection has to be forged with magical properties, or whether it's simply a matter of nature in that world. I lean towards anyone can tame or ride a dragon if they build up the relationship sufficiently, and I think that was alluded to principally in the show by Tyrion, of course, when he goes down into the location in which the dragons are being held, and he seems to be he seems to have the start of a relationship there. Whether or not that could have ever resulted in him riding a dragon is questionable. But I think it alludes to the fact that those relationships can be built by non-Targaryens or non-Valyrians. So yeah, I think it certainly leads that way.
But you do know Tyrion's a Targaryen, right?
Well, that's the theory, isn't it? Yeah.
I don't think so.
I don't like that theory personally.
No. I like Jaime and Cersei being Targaryens more than I do
Me,
Tyrion.
I totally agree. I think there's way more dramatic irony in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what did you guys think of Danny's Hitler speech?
Third Reich speech. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, before we get to it, I think I'd like to commend whoever designed the shot preceding it.
Sure.
Because
that was beautiful.
Cinematic history.
You're talking about the dragon wings?
Yes, when she's walking to the podium or the top of the stairs, and the dragon wings sprout out as though they are hers. That
was definitely a cool shot. Yeah,
it was beautiful.
Yes. As for the Third Reich speech itself, it's difficult for me because it's hard to be persuaded that she is now the Game of Thrones embodiment of Hitler. When a month ago she was fighting for the living, and this is the other thing as well. I get, she's been through stress and she's had grief and people have died and this, that, and the other. But I'm not sure how many days have elapsed between the Battle of Winterfell and the sacking of King's Landing.
Like 3, because they could teleport.
Yeah, it's very difficult to see how someone could risk their children fighting for the living and then proceed to completely annihilate the living that she just fought to save. I mean, that's just one example of the bad writing, I think. But
Claire, we haven't heard from you in a bit.
Right. Okay. Well, first of all, I would say, just from what you were saying earlier about fire and blood, I think that probably is a lot to do with fire magic and blood magic have both been linked to Danny's story, both in the books and in the show. Mm-hmm. I would also say read Fire and Blood, and you'll probably get quite a few answers in that book there. I really don't want to be a Debbie Downer, a Debbie Dragon Downer, but the one thing that really spoiled that image of the dragon wings coming out behind Daenerys, this is going to sound really nerdy and picky, but the scale. The dragon was far too small behind her. If you look at other shots of Drogon in King's Landing, he's massive. He's giant to the scale of him sat on the side of the tower. And every time I look at it, I'm like, is it a perspective thing? Is it a distance thing? How far away?
Yeah, but still, it's not far away enough.
He's 1 mile away.
Yeah, it just doesn't, just the scale of it's like,
So what you're doing, Claire, is you're taking the one element of the episode that I enjoyed, just completely shitting all over it. So thanks for that.
Sorry.
No, the visual was good with the wings. It's when the dragon flies up, but Claire's right. It is pretty small.
Yeah.
I liked the again, reasonably plausible. I think out of the two things, out of Daenerys becoming the baddie and Bran becoming, I nearly said Bran again, Bran becoming king, I think the writers managed to make sort of Daenerys a bit more plausible for me, because she has said, and it's not impossible to think that she may say, I will take what's mine by fire and blood. She's said that plenty of times before, and this time I mean, it's plausible to me to think that what might be going on in her head is, look, these are my house words. I've been told by that old woman, Elena, to be the dragon, become the dragon. My house words are fire and blood. I've got this burning thing inside me that's like, any moment now I'm going to kind of wake the dragon sort of thing. But on top of that, I've tried to do it your way. I've tried to help you out in your battles. I've tried to think about how to fairly unify the kingdoms. I've tried to think about what's best for the people. Yeah, I know I'm a bit narcissistic when it comes to what I think is the best for people, but, you know, you can kind of get into a head a little bit with that. But what's happened is, doing it your way, I've lost my advisor, my best like gal pal who does my hair. I've lost two of my dragons actually doing things your way. So it's going to change. And I think that may be what the Bell thing was. You know, people have said, what was it that triggered her with it? I think it was just a random thing that made her go, I'm not doing it this way anymore. I'm now going to do it this way. As crazy and as irrational as it was, that makes more sense to me. Wow, I've probably gone way off track. Sorry, but the dictator.
No, I think you're on point. I mean, I think that maybe you could argue it was a little rushed, but certainly it fits. It totally tracks with where they were going with
Definitely
her character.
tracks.
Yeah. So the whole sort of dictator speech, and apparently Amelia had actually sort of watched, you know, Nazi speeches in preparation.
At all. By the way, that was not the only allusion to the Nazis. I don't know if anyone caught Tyrion talking to Jon, and just as a little. So Tyrion talking to Jon, and he says, in Astapor she killed the slavers and everyone was okay because the slavers are evil. In Marine, she did this and it was okay because everyone's evil. And he does this speech where he says basically every time she kills these evil people, we cheer her and that goes to her head. And I think that was actually, hearkening to a poem by Martin Niemöller about the Nazis. If anyone's heard this, I'm just going to read it. It's real quick anyway.
Cool.
It goes. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And I definitely think that line, or that series of lines from Tyrion, was an allusion to that. It was, I think, definitely some, there was some not so subtle allusions to the Nazis.
It was a little short, but we needed you to do a James Johnson reading voice there.
Well, okay.
Oh, when James goes into his poetry, he always puts on this great voice when he's reading it. It's awesome.
DJ, can I ask you, because you have the notes and I don't? There was a part of that conversation. I'm fairly certain it was the same scene where Tyrion mentioned something like, "If you truly believed X, you."
Yes,
something about paradise.
I absolutely wrote a note about this too because it's a great line.
Can you read what she says and then let me? Sure.
Yeah. So it's for the theme of all of this is it's talking about how are good people convinced to do evil things. Right, that's what we're all hovering around with all this, right? And it's if you truly believed, she says, if you truly believed it, wouldn't you kill whoever stood between you and paradise? Is the line.
Well, I think you know where I'm going with this.
I do, because
here's the thing. One issue that is pervading our world is the connection between belief and behavior. Now, I won't go into specifics because there are various, some more obvious than others. But I think the point they're making here is that by trying to obfuscate that link, that idea that your belief system can impact your behaviors, you obfuscate that truth, that central truth, at everyone's peril. And I think that they've really harped on that quite nicely, because what they're saying is that if you believe something enough, if you truly believe something enough, and they use the word paradise quite purposefully in my view, then your actions can turn from being what you perceive as being good, can turn to being actually very despotical, tyrannical, and senseless. But
Well,
in your
this is what
that's what you think, and that's the key issue.
this is what I argued with about Stannis when he burned Shireen. And my argument was, if he truly believes that this is the best course, he has to burn Shireen. Because he's fully invested in that logic. If you're a true believer and your God tells you to do something and this is what's going to happen, you do it. But thankfully, lots of us aren't true believers.
To bring it one step further, or maybe into more clarity, is because I think he phrases it perfectly, which is, if you truly believed it, wouldn't you kill whoever stood between you and paradise? It's what you have to do is put yourself in the mind, the state of mind where you believe that this person in front of you is trying to perform evil deeds, and you are trying to bring the world to a better place. Not to get too political, but I've heard this argument put really well for not in defense in defense of or against abortion, just to bring this into the real world for a second without getting political. The idea being, if you are pro-choice, as we call it in the States at least, what you should attempt to do to understand where somebody who's pro-life is coming from is really get in their head and realize that what they think or what they believe is that you are literally killing babies. And if you can get yourself to a state of mind where you believe people are killing babies, it is really not that hard to get to a place where you want to stop that.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
I think that's what they were attempting to say with that statement.
Well, I think very succinctly and very conceptually, what they're working with here is the idea that rationality is subjective. So, using another example from the real world, 9/11, which of course is very central to this point. If you genuinely, and of course, there are arguments that it's a multifaceted issue, foreign policy, whatever. But the fact is, if you truly believe that flying a plane into a building will get you into paradise for eternity, then if you are at that point of your kind of mental functioning, that is the absolute epitome of rationality. There's nothing irrational about that behavior with the requisite beliefs. And that's what they're playing with here. They're playing with rationality and subjective righteousness. And I think they did it beautifully.
Yeah.
Like it. Love it. Yep.
Yeah.
Well
I think
said.
that's great. Claire, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, just that, Varys was right. And I think Tyrion knew that he was right and reflected much more on it in his incarceration. Power resides where people believe it resides. And Daenerys knew that because she realized very quickly that the problems that she was going to have with Jon and the North meant that. And she took that step back. Okay, I'll have to go with fear. So she's taking it. She's taking that power, and people will immediately, automatically see and believe very heavily that that's where power resides, because there is no other option. She's going to be a dictator. And I think at the moment that Jon plunges the knife into her is the moment that Jon decides, you should not have the power residing within you. I do not recognize that this is the right thing. And that's when he took it away.
I don't know if it's the right term, but it's kind of a catch-22, because yes, she makes that choice to go for power and show how powerful she is. But at the same point, that's the part that kills her, is because she took that step. It's actually her downfall.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the end, it didn't really matter because she already had it. The city had surrendered, but a madness had taken over by then. I think it just took Jon along. Jon Snow really does know nothing. He really does.
So
well, it took him. So this is the thing. I imagine you guys kind of all realize this, whether or not you noted it or not. But Jon went full Jaime, right? So Jon does what Jaime does to Aerys, and he kills the king. Except Jon waited till after the city burned, whereas Jaime stopped it before it was happening. John didn't clue in until, oh yeah, she just fried a whole city. I guess I'm gonna have to kill her.
You
And
know
even
what,
then, he had a hard time with it.
guys? I think I have a great take here, and it's not something I noted, but it's something I just realized is
Mhm.
that scene between John and Danny. There's this great moment where they're talking about Danny knowing what's good, and she actually says to John, "You know what's good. You always have known." Right before the scene where he stabs her. So the last thing is somebody telling him that he actually does know something, and it's what's good.
Okay, nice, nice, nice. And it also goes to show. See, I never liked the when he killed Danny scene. I wanted more realization or something rather than her just dying. I wanted her to say like, "Oh, I
She died
get
pretty
why
quick.
you're doing this." Yeah.
Yeah.
But now, if she does clue into the fact that she tells John that you always know what's right, and then
Yep.
realizes that when he kills her, it's the right move. I like that. It makes that scene a bit more tolerable for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't before. I didn't like it at all. But yeah, no, that's
Well,
good.
I love the idea too that John's you know nothing, Jon Snow, that whole trope, but
Mhm.
the one thing he has always known is he's always been able to know how to stay on course as far as his principles
Yeah,
go.
which is it's the Ned trait, right? When he's asked about Ned, what would your father do? He would do what's right.
Yeah.
So I like that.
But the key distinction here is that he will never force his view of right and wrong on other people unless he's kind of forced into it.
Mm,
Whereas Danny, as she says to him,
yes.
they don't have a choice.
Yeah,
What
they don't.
John's saying is everyone has a choice for their own kind of path, and that's the key
Mhm.
distinction.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I would also note that as far as criticisms go, I think it's really weird that nobody was guarding Danny at all, and John was able to walk in with two weapons.
Well, that's the
So
interesting
this
thing.
is I'm gonna let me run on this for a second, Callum. So
Go
this
ahead.
is what I thought was gonna happen, and I'm quite disappointed that it didn't. And so I'm gonna talk about Grey Worm here. I thought Grey Worm, after Danny was giving her Hitler speech, which I didn't like either, by the way, just because I don't like them using that element of our life into this show. It seems
It's a
too
little too
easy.
heavy-handed. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish they could have done it a different way than that. But I thought Grey Worm was going to have a realization from his last talk with Missandei about how after this was all done, they would go back to Narth and he would do everything over there. And then Grey Worm would realize, and I thought he was for a second because they panned to his face and stuff, that, oh shit, Danny's kind of lost her mind. And I thought that Grey Worm had decided to let John in there himself, and the plan was already sort of made, and that's why Danny wasn't being guarded. But in the end, it turned out that it wasn't. John just kind of walked through and killed her. But I'm upset about
Yeah.
that aspect of Grey Worm because I thought he was going to have his own realization arc,
Mm.
but it never panned out. So I'm
Well,
disappointed in that.
yes, that's fair. There is one thing that you missed though, which I wanted to get your guys' opinion on, because of course Danny was guarded by Drogon, but he allowed John
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
And then of course after John did the deed, again Drogon appeared and failed to kind of do anything in terms of hurting John or whatever. So it's interesting to me what your guys' take on that is, because it seems that Drogon, whether or not he senses something or he knows something or whatever it might be, there's some kind of connection between him and John, which not only allowed John to pass through, but also allowed John to get away with his life.
Well, there's also a point, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but the fact that Drogon was covered, and at this point, I do believe it's snow, and he shakes all the snow off of him, and then you see it, which was another awesome visual, by the way, that the dragon being covered in the snow, and then all of a sudden you see that it's there. I like that too.
That was cool.
But
I took it
that
as
has
like a
to mean
phoenix
something
rising
as
from the
well.
ashes, but
Oh, so you think it was still ashes? I thought there was snow
I
falling
don't
there.
know. Yeah, I guess it must have been snow, but I think it must have been because when you see Drogon flying away, the sky is completely, cloudy
Yeah,
and gray. So
yeah.
I'm assuming it was snow, but it's still like obviously what they were going for was a sort of symbolism of like if it's a snow, whether it's snow or ashes. I mean, there's the symbolism there
Mhm.
either way. So
Claire?
Yeah, I
Quiet.
think it demonstrates the symbiotic relationship between the dragons and the Targaryens, and I think Drogon just saw this is what destroyed her. I'm going to destroy it. So that's what his instincts were, and I think he probably didn't even consider Jon. I think his target was this thing that he knew had destroyed Daenerys.
Mm. Well, it's stated in the books and also the TV show, I think, but I'm not sure. Definitely the books. Someone mentions that dragons are more intelligent than humans.
Yep.
So I agree. I think Drogon is thinking conceptually here, where although Jon was the person who directly caused her death, overall the overarching cause, and the cause that couldn't be stopped was her lust for power, as represented by the throne. So I like that scene. That scene was criticised as well, but it wasn't too bad for me. I enjoyed it.
The main thing that confused me, sorry, I'll just say quickly, the main thing that confused me wasn't that I agree with you completely. Yes, she was. A lot of people have said, oh, she wasn't even guarded, and she was by Drogon. That's good enough.
Yeah.
But the fact that, like, how did everybody get to find out unless Jon walked out and went, oh, no, guess what I've just done? You know, it just
He probably.
doesn't.
I think when they caught him,
do.
he probably would just say like, "Yep, I
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
I agree with DJ. Yeah, that's probably what Jon would do. So, guys, I killed Danny. I had to.
So
now you can do it with me.
I want to throw out a parallel moment here. I think maybe this is stretching, but when Danny and Grey Worm burn Missandei's shackles in the fire, Drogon melted Danny's shackle. That was honestly
nice.
the throne was her shackle.
Yeah,
it was something she was bound to, to her own detriment. And that was the last thing after she dies, just like Missandei, after she dies, they burn the shackle binding.
And you have to feel sort of bad about it because her wanting of the throne too was actually beaten into her by Viserys. Like, it's not nothing that she grew up with. It was just pounded and pounded into her, so it became all that she was about. And it's actually kind of heartbreaking.
It's super tragic. Her whole story.
Also, the Iron Throne was forged by Dragon Flame and destroyed. So there is a lot of this full circling happening, but whether it might be a bit clumsy, but it's kind of there.
So my mother told me after she saw the episode that she didn't feel very emotional about Danny's death, that she didn't find it very satisfying.
It wasn't very satisfying.
Well, let me throw this out there. I disagree. I found it pretty emotionally satisfying in terms of, when I look at Danny's story, I see it's almost Shakespearean how tragic her story is, because and she mentions it in that scene. She says, when I was a little girl who couldn't count to 20, she's talking about there was a point in her life where she was just a little girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then this sense of fate, this sense of, responsibility and obligation to do these certain things and all this stuff has been, beaten into her. As a little girl, it's not like she wanted the Iron Throne, right? This is stuff that was, she's a product of her environment. And I feel like this is a little bit played with the, do you think our house words are stamped on us when we're born and all that? I don't think it is. I think a big theme here is that we're products of our environment, and the cycle is that, someone wrongs us and we wrong them. We inherit the sins of our fathers and all this stuff. I think her story is probably one of the most tragic in this entire series.
Yeah, I agree. And when I say that it wasn't that Danny's death was a letdown, like I really feel like it was for me.
Could have been drawn
But as
out.
I said earlier, the way that you explained the point where Jon actually always knows what's right and stuff, and that little bit of realization helps me out a bit. But I still wish, like, it just happened so quick and then you're kind of done with it. That's the part that let me down. Her whole story is definitely tragic and definitely heartbreaking. But I wasn't a super big fan of the way it ended here. I wanted more.
Sure.
Which
Two
is
questions.
sad.
Two questions. Firstly, do you think that one of the reasons you might have wanted more is because her death was particularly cliche? You know, the way that it was shot, the way that it was done. I mean, you could have bet money that that was how it would go down. You know, they're
You could have,
embracing
yeah,
and
you easily could have.
dagger
Like,
to the heart. That's the first thing. The second question is, firstly, is it significant? And secondly, where do you think Drogon took Dany's body? And what do you think Drogon's end game is? Because he was,
yeah,
Hashtag
I never liked
Drogon.
doing
Hashtag
stuff like
Hashtag Brogon.
he-
We were
he was-
so close. We were so close to it, Claire.
yeah.
Oh,
Um,
well, we can imagine lots of fun theories with that. That he's taken her to Valyria, to the home of the Valyrians and the Targaryens. Maybe he's taken her somewhere like a Shy, where
Yeah, I'm thinking of Shy or something.
God can maybe revive her again. She become who knows.
I wish we'd seen something though. I wish we'd seen her final resting place. I know the show can't answer every question, but I feel for the 5 or 6 main characters, there needs to be some kind of closure, especially if they're dead. Just Drogon flying away didn't satisfy me, but maybe I'm asking for too much.
I always have this idea for a story in my head, and one of it's like sort of like a Hand of the King character who is actually the true king, and his final resting place is like he's dead on a mountain looking over his kingdom, and it's just his bones and his throne like set in a mountain where he just dies there and is left in peace looking over his kingdom. So that's where I'm going with Dany. She's just on a mountain somewhere watching what was hers.
You know, she never actually sat the Iron Throne.
She didn't. She touched it.
She
But-
touched it. She just got to it. You know.
I mean, we don't really know from the episode whether she was even crowned.
Yeah, actually, I don't think she was. There was no coronation that I'm aware of.
Mm.
Which is funny because we see Sansa getting crowned.
I just
Yeah.
think all those times, all that extra time watching people walk around corridors or crypts or whatever. There was a lot of walking and just wandering around. They could have used a couple of seconds to show nice little clips that would have made just that bit of a sense check, like, oh look, there's Pod getting knighted by Brienne. Okay, that makes sense a bit later on.
Yeah, they didn't show that. They just
that would've been
alluded to
nice.
it, right? Sir Pod, yeah.
All but
Yeah.
3 seconds to show something like that, and other things like that just kind of circle things off a little bit for us that are like, oh right.
As far as Dany's death goes, going to what Calum was asking about it being cliche, I think the only thing that really bothered me about her death scene wasn't how it happened. It was like MP is saying, sort of, I wish they drew it out some more, because when you're stabbed, you don't just like die. You don't just like immediately die. What I really wish, and what I think would have made that scene probably to bring it over the top, is if there was some of that time was used in her being in anguish and staring at Jon's face like she did, but maybe crying, and then both just looking into each other as she dies, instead of this sort of weird, she sort of was stoic about it and was, I don't know. I feel like that part where she actually dies is a little rushed, and they could have drawn that out some.
I feel
Like
like
she
they-
doesn't
they-
even she doesn't even make a sound or anything when he stabs her, does she? Like she's just done after that. And it's just quiet. Yeah, I don't like it.
I was kind of half expecting her last facial expression to be one of calmness or even slight happiness in that she's been freed from this eternal and perpetual shackle that she's been dealing with, and also the realization that she has gone a little bit mad. In those final few moments, I was really expecting her to just have some kind of expression on her face. And by the way, Emilia Clarke could have pulled it off because of how talented she is. Some kind of expression which is a mixture of, oh God, what have I done? Thank you, and I know this is the right thing. But yeah, it was a bit rushed, and they didn't really factor in that. But whatever.
Such
I
high
just-
expectations, all of you.
What?
I just want to say, Calum, I agree with you,
High
and I think
expectations.
Amelia Clark is super talented. And I had this argument or discussion with somebody once, way back when, who's like was shitting on Amelia Clark for how she's portraying Danny and how bad it was. And my argument was, but yes, she's portraying a girl who's trying to portray herself as a queen. She's not actually a queen, so she's not good at it. Danny herself is trying to fit the bill of the queen, so that's why
Yes.
she's bad at doing it. And I think Amelia Clark was going with that.
I like that.
Yeah.
We've just got one more thing to throw in here about Daenerys, which I think definitely would have made a lot more sense. One of the writers has come out in the last week or so and said that they all were desperate for Jorah to remain alive right up until the end. So that scene at the very end of this episode in the finale where John and Tormund are walking out through the wall into the north, the two of them, that actually should have been what they wanted, was the three of them, that Jorah ended up being back in the north and he was like part of that group. Now, that would have made so much more sense thinking about that if that had been a massive Jorah on top of everything else that Daenerys was dealing with. Imagine how delicious it would have been for Jorah to start noticing, whoa, there's some real serious stuff going on in Daenerys' head. And actually remembering that he's a Northman, remembering that he's got some sort of duty to his father at the wall, and he's from Bear Island, maybe connecting with his cousin Lyanna, just something more there where he ended up doing this, having this massive betrayal rather than. I just think it would have made a lot.
I think I said earlier in one of our reviews, but maybe not, maybe I didn't, but I definitely toyed with the idea that Jorah was going to be the one that killed Danny. I thought it was going to be him. Like he finally had that sort of realization. Oh, she's kind of flipped the script. So I thought it was going to be him at one point, but
I think they even filmed like alternative endings, and they ended up going with the one where Jorah was killed.
I hope there's so much stacked versions on the DVDs when they're finally released. Like I hope there's so much shit that we can watch.
There's also apparently, while we're at it, because there's no point in it's not like it's spoiler territory anymore, but the actress who plays Brienne has also said that there were a ton of additional scenes between her and Tormund after Jaime had left Winterfell.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I know. And she's like, in this interview, she was like wondering whether or not it'll be on like extras or Blu-ray or whatever.
You guys saw after the credits though, right? Where Brienne goes through the wall, like at the very last thing, like after the credits roll, and Brienne's like going off into the distance. Okay, nobody fell for that. All right.
I was like, what the hell are you talking about?
They would have needed a 10-hour long post-credit scene to rectify that nonsense.
But I think some of that stuff, if they'd have kept in with Jorah, maybe even before he died, just drop some real clangers where he starts to think about, because it was all laid onto Varys. The betrayal of Daenerys was all loaded onto Varys, and again, there's just so much that makes little sense. Like, where did those letters go? He'd actually written a bunch of letters saying, "Yeah, it's John." By the way, everyone.
Didn't you see the new Prince of Dorne though? Wasn't that satisfying?
Well, that was the most. Speaking of time. Speaking of time being limited, I think the most jarring scene shift for me was when we went from John being imprisoned to the council meeting. Like, how the hell did all seven?
Well, it went as soon as Drogon flew away with Danny. We went to Tyrion being walked out too.
Like when I first watched it, and I was like, how the hell did they get there?
We went from the last. This is how I viewed it. We went from the last scene of, if this was a book, we went from the very last paragraph where Drogon flies off with Danny of the book proper directly into the epilogue, which was Tyrion then being walked out to the council. That began the epilogue.
Okay, gotcha. Kind of
Yeah.
makes
Oh,
sense
so-
when you look at it that way.
Thus begins the principal nonsense.
Yeah, so I actually agree, by the way, that I would say so this was broken up almost exactly in half, where there was just over 40 minutes dedicated to the first half of this story, which was up till Dany dies, and then the last half of it was this sort of bizarre epilogue.
Yeah, I will say up until the point where Danny died, I think one of you guys mentioned this earlier. I think it was DJ actually. Up until the point Danny died, for me, the episode was going in a decent direction. The real nonsense, the really aggravating, unforgivable, senseless nonsense began at this very scene that we're about to discuss, in my view.
The Bran's moot.
The chair moot.
The Bran moot, yeah.
Yeah, so let's hop into it then and see. Yeah, let's hop into this whole brand moot then.
First of all, why on earth they could have written this so much better? It basically looked like Tyrion marched out in shackles, was told by Grey Worm, "Don't you say a thing," and then he suddenly decided to ever present rapporteur decided that he was going to play the crowd, make it. Where did this come from? Why was it allowed to happen? He's a prisoner, for Christ's sake, and within 10 minutes he becomes Hand of the King. What the actual fuck?
It was pretty sad, yeah.
Can I bounce off this, because I've got a diatribe welling up inside of me that just needs to be released about there are a few things that the council meeting finalized, one of which is the king and all that stuff. I'm going to focus on Jon and his banishment. I'm trying to think how to kind of word this. I'm going to use an analogy from Lord of the Rings, because I love Lord of the Rings. So imagine this. Imagine if instead of the hobbits going back to the Shire to live out their days, the new King of Gondor, who, let's say it's Gimli the Dwarf, because why not? The new King of Gondor, Gimli the Dwarf, instead of sending the hobbits back, he negotiates with the remaining orc leader to send the hobbits to prison for life, for eternity, in perpetuity, ad infinitum, rather than having them executed. This is all to appease the orcs, who then decide to leave Middle-earth forever.
Yeah. Like
that for me. Can you just imagine living in a world where Tolkien writes that? Because I can't, and I'm happy that I can't even imagine it, because it's just such utter, unapologetic. Yeah. It's awful. I mean, his reward for freeing the world from a despotical, tyrannical maniac is to be banished in perpetuity. And
waited for the Unsullied to sail out of the bay and then
just be like, just kidding, come back. Yeah.
Not only that, but the North is now the North is now its own kingdom anyway.
So there's more to it too than that. There's not only is the North its own kingdom, so as soon as he enters the North, he's outside of the six kingdoms anyway, right? Mm-hmm. But the Night's Watch, Jon even actually says to Tyrion, he goes, "Does the Night's Watch even exist anymore? Like, is that even a thing?" It doesn't. So there's this weird thing. This is what I would say. I wouldn't have minded that choice so much if they spun it in a way where it was clearly viewed that the people who banished him, quote unquote, were really setting him free.
And they were, but it's not explained.
But they
very
weren't.
Well.
No, this is why it's not done really well, because then they have Sansa say to Jon,
"Yeah,
I'm really sorry about this. You know, we wanted to get you free." And it's like, well, if she had said something like, you know, more along the lines of hinting that this was to set him free rather than to punish him, I would have been much happier with that choice. I think there is a way to banish Jon to the North and still have it be satisfying. I'm still glad he went north and went beyond the wall, because that's how I wanted his ending to go. Yeah. That's how I thought it was leading. You know, all that stuff made sense. How they went about doing it was definitely silly.
I think it definitely made sense to me that Jon ended up back in the North. Think about what Tormund said about, you know, you have the North in you. Right from the very beginning in the TV show, and definitely in the books, in Jon's initial chapters in Game of Thrones, you get the impression that this sibling had
That's a
much
goal.
more of an affinity with the North
Mhm.
than any of the other Stark siblings.
Any of the other
But
Tully children?
Yeah, and it just makes sense to me. Maybe there's a purpose to him being resurrected, and maybe he's just destined to wander the Great North for the rest of his life, and that's who he is, and he becomes some sort of legendary king beyond the wall. However,
Yeah,
I also
right now
think
there's
indicates, just going back to the like, I think Bran knew that as well. I think Bran knew that Jon was needed to be back in the North. That's what his destiny would ultimately be. And I also think that off page, off screen, there was a lot more to that conversation that Tyrion and Bran had at Winterfell. Tell me about your journey. I think that Bran and Tyrion had some kind of pact, maybe between them. That who knows how much of that was taken on board, how much it was just a conversation, and how much was a plan, and exactly what Bran said to Tyrion. But there seemed to definitely be some connection to Tyrion sort of standing there and saying, "The one with the best story."
mm-hmm.
Maybe
There you go.
during
No,
that
I like how you added
conversation,
that there because I was
maybe
thinking
during
that. Go
sorry, I
ahead.
was just going to finish. Maybe during that conversation, Bran alluded to Tyrion that Jon needed to be back in the North, and that's why it just seemed to crop up in conversation in that weird Bran's moot scene. Yeah.
So
Claire loves putting little labels on things.
yeah,
The brand new Brogon.
well, it's funny. It's funny because of all of the what I'll call transgressions from the writers, the one that peeved me off the most was Jon Snow's story and his ending. Not his very end, because again, I agree he belongs in the North. So the very end of his story is what makes sense, and I think that will happen also in the books. The problem is how he got there. So this season has been a bit of a character assassination for Jon, for me, because if you look at the three building arcs for both Jon and the show, because Jon plays a central part therein. The first is his lineage. MP will disagree, but the fact is, it's been building for 7 seasons. His lineage, right? That wasn't in any kind of significant sense satisfied.
Has no purpose in the whole season or the whole series.
Even though Varys sent letters out to everybody saying it's Jon.
You could argue that it sowed the seed of the downfall of Jon and Dany's relationship. Sure. But quite frankly, that could have happened anyway, just based on her madness and the fact that she was going to try and assault Winterfell and all that stuff. So his lineage played no part whatsoever in the final season, despite playing a significant part in the preceding 7 seasons. That's the first thing. The second thing is Jon's character, again, in all 7 preceding seasons, has been him being kind of reluctantly pushed into a position of leadership because of his merits within that kind of role. And then the final thing is this idea of you know nothing, Jon Snow. And this one's a bit more difficult to put my finger on because there's various interpretations. One of which that I think is particularly convincing is that what you think and what you say are irrelevant compared to what you do. That's one of my interpretations of that. You know, like Jon Snow, it doesn't matter what you think; it matters what you do. And what Jon does is always, the right thing in terms of what most people would agree to be the right thing. So to summarize, I'm about to end this. To summarize, we have his lineage being, his royal lineage, his being pushed into a reluctant leadership role, and his actions being significant. All 3 of these things lead towards kingship. Okay, so this has to be satisfied in some respect because it's been building for 7 seasons. I don't think Jon should sit the throne forever, but something has to happen to pay off all of those building arcs. So for me, that must have been he had to sit the throne temporarily, as befits his character, because he would feel a duty to restore order to the chaos ensued by his wife. But whether or not you believe that's how they should satisfy it, it has to happen in some respect. Or, and this is the last thing, or the writers can break off an arc and fail to satisfy it with a very good reason. The problem is they had neither. They didn't satisfy it, and they didn't have a good reason for not doing so.
Well,
And that
Maybe,
to quote Jon Snow, I don't want it.
doesn't
There you
matter.
go.
maybe the reason is you're going to be pissed off with this, but maybe the reason is it doesn't matter. Maybe even that's the point. Whatever your lineage is, however important you think it is, ultimately in this new world, in this way of looking at things, it doesn't really matter.
I go
I
with
think
that more than what Calum says. I don't think John needs to sit the Iron Throne just because they're leading up to it. Again, my argument, and as you said, I would argue against it, is sure, they're forcing us to look that way, but that's not where we're going with the story. It's
And I think
Catelyn
he is
kidnapping Tyrion and saying, hey guys, we're going to Winterfell, and everybody thinks you're going to Winterfell, but they end up at the Vale. The story takes a different arc than where people think it's supposed to go. John not following the correct path doesn't play with me because I don't expect him to. Just because the story says he has to be there doesn't mean he has to be there.
I think he also is. He is in a leadership position where he is now. Like when that final scene before the screen goes black.
I like where he is, but I don't feel like.
No, I think that's a fair criticism.
But what I'm saying is, it's the preceding 7 seasons have to matter, at least in some respect, and his lineage has been building for 7 seasons as one of the most, if not the most, significant revelation of the entire thing, and it hasn't been played upon. Nothing has come of it, and for me,
and there's a damn good reason for that.
It's bad writing because, as I said at the start, they have prioritized shock over sense, and that's why I think it's receiving such bad reviews, because people are thinking, meh. They're trying to shock me. It makes no sense.
Right.
They haven't played on the writing.
This goes to Arya killing the Night King too, where they foreshadow it being Jon for at least 2 seasons, and then Arya does it, and the purpose was to sort of be like, whoa, they got us, Arya did it, but instead you're like, why did you spend all this time making Jon and the Night King stare at each other, look each other in the eyes, and you foreshadow all this just to have Arya do it?
I think the books will make the show so much better for you guys. I think so.
I think we're missing. If you think about the things that made little sense, and we've talked about them already, the stuff that happened with the Unsullied, Davos appearing on the council, Sam suddenly becoming Maester, even though he's not even forged a chain in the Citadel.
Doesn't he have like a couple links now?
Yeah, DJ's just said it. Arya and the Night King. Calum's talking about Jon and how a lot of the stuff that the foundations that have been laid that just didn't seem to really have any kind of satisfactory payoff. This is all because we didn't have enough episodes, and if they'd have, even given the writing standard as it is for this season, if they'd have had more, if they'd have had another 4 episodes, I think we would have all had more of a, oh yeah, we're really sad it's over, but at the same time, a lot of what's been built has made sense.
I think I said last episode review that we did, I think almost exactly word for word, it only could have benefited by having more episodes.
Yeah,
right? There's absolutely no downside to having more episodes. It only could have built us up in a way where this stuff would have been more satisfying.
I have no idea what the logic was behind the last 2 seasons to shorten them. It makes no sense to me.
It's been reported that both George Martin and HBO wanted 10 more full seasons.
Yes.
And it was Dan and Dave that refused to budge on their 75-hour preview. When they took the show on, they said this will be finished in 75 hours, and they stuck to it fervently. And for me, it makes me a little bit sick because, of course, this was their first TV show ever, as far as I'm aware. Game of Thrones and George Martin's story, more specifically, has elevated their careers into the stratosphere, and they couldn't. Frankly, the way it looks is they couldn't be bothered to actually give the story enough episodes to actually lead to a satisfying conclusion. They wanted to be finished with it so they could move on to other projects such as Star Wars.
Also arguable too. I mean, it remains to be seen, but they can only work with stuff that's already out there rather than create their own content and make it satisfying. Because once the story was gone,
George wanted 10 seasons, and he
said that. I've heard him say that. Yep.
Choices were made, and massive editing cuts and decisions were made that messed it up.
I've got a good line.
To add this into the things that make no sense that Calum was going off, you forget the original one, which is Rhaegar's prophecy and why Jon was, quote unquote, created to begin with anyways, has absolutely no bearing at this moment. If he's the third head of the dragon or whatever the fuck Rhaegar is playing with.
So we've discussed in the past about how sometimes the show will throw lines into the show that are really they're talking about outside of the show, right? They're breaking the fourth wall in a way, right? We've talked about this. Mm-hmm. I think that one that maybe is or is not does or does not fall into this category. Episode. But let's talk about this one where Tyrion says, I think this so wraps up everything that we're talking about right now, which is Tyrion says, no one is very happy, which means it is a good compromise. I feel like sums up this entire season, this entire episode. It's compromise is when both parties are equally unhappy with where they ended.
I mean, there were good moments. If you look back through the entire season, I think they did some moments really well, and some characters did have quite a satisfactory end. I was under no illusion about the Hound and the whole Clegane Bowl thing. In fact, I was dreading it, to be honest, that they'd completely just like, oh my God, this is going to be total fan fiction. But I think that worked really well. I think that whole scene worked really well. It was a good, satisfactory ending for the Hound. I think even some of the minor characters like Melisandre, and although I have heard it described as just, so Mel was just like a glorified Zippo lighter.
That episode
in the season. And Beric, characters like Beric and even, like we've already discussed to an extent, that sort of poetic end for Jaime and Cersei. There was some scenes, and some of the, like, again, Tyrion's actor Peter Dinklage was wonderful. A lot of the other actors, you can really see the difference in progression and skill and experience from earlier seasons to this season. But yeah, you've got to strike a balance. I wouldn't say it was necessarily zero. That you can see the effort put in there, but I just think it's such a shame because they had some really good story lines that they could have fulfilled without going massively out of budget or too much, I don't think, out of the way. And it's like somebody came in really drunk and said, right, I'm just going to chop it all up, and these are the decisions that we're going to have with the editing. And it was like, that's it. We can't get out of it. We're just going to make the best of it.
I think their best episodes are the ones where it's not a big budget episode with CGI and stuff. I mean, my favorite ones are dialogue-driven conversations between the people that I love the most. So, and that's what ties the story together. So they could have easily shot more episodes.
To answer that, MP, I think that it's a bit of give and take, a bit of yin and yang, in the sense that what Game of Thrones has so nicely and effectively communicated is just how powerful words are. So I agree. You'll have a scene with two characters in a room together, and they'll have fantastic and intriguing and rapturous dialogue, which you're discussing and you're saying that's what you enjoy. But the fact is, that's what sets up the battle scenes, because the show is stating that it's these words between these two people that has led to this huge ordeal. And I think that I agree, those episodes, like episode 2, are the ones that are most satisfying. But they are, in a sense, they are satisfying simply because they have the payoff. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. That's what separates good writers from bad writers, essentially.
Yes. Next scene, or anything else more to say?
I was just gonna say, because actually MP had mentioned this previously, so he may want to talk about this one. But there was another fourth wall breaking line in that scene where Jon asked Tyrion, "Was it right what I did?" And then Tyrion says, "Ask me in 10 years," or whatever, something along those
Yeah.
lines.
Yes.
Which I
Which
think
was a
was
great
another fourth wall break, and it's sort of like, was it right that
What we did to the show.
what we did to this story
Yeah.
will
Well, I think-
pay off? And I said it earlier. I said I think you guys will all enjoy the TV show a bit more once the books come out.
Yes.
And I hope so that Ask Me Again in 10 Years, I believe, is okay. Let's figure this out once the books are done, and we'll see.
Right.
No wonder poor Kit Harington's in bloody rehab at the moment. This is the kind of dialogue that mangles with your brain, isn't it? You know, I mean, he said effectively, I know I keep throwing real life stuff in here, but I think it's important that a lot of these characters grew up on this TV show over the last 8-9 years. And Maisie Williams and Sophie Turner have both talked about depression and anxiety. And John, the guy who played Kit Harington, where he was talking about the worst possible time for him as an actor and holding it together really during this whole adventure is at the end of season 5 when he gets that massive huge cliffhanger, and the harassment he must have had from people. What happens? Do you come back? Is this going to get just it must have been horrific. And I mean, I did watch the behind the scenes, the making of Game of Thrones, and I did think to myself, he comes across, the actor Kit Harington does come across, sorry Kit if you ever watch this, but as a bit of a lovey, you know, a little bit flaky, a little bit of a lovey, a bit kind of oversensitive, a bit sort of, so it's like, wow, yeah, that's the kind of dialogue, that whole fourth wall breaking stuff, Ask Me in 10 Years, that's just going to make you kind of, it would mess with your brain, I think, if you're in that environment and that character and that whole massive amount of your life growing. I mean, he met his wife, for God's sake, on the show, you know. It's personal, isn't it?
Yeah. Also, a lot of the actors that you mentioned, this was their first hit. Effectively, this was their first gig. You know, so they've been thrust into this world of, you know, movie stardom or TV show stardom without any prior experience therein. You know, so it's you can definitely sympathise and see why this kind of effect would take hold of particularly Kit, but also Sophie and Maisie.
I'm surprised. I don't know his name, but the character of Ser Jorah, the actor, I'm surprised he was never James Bond. just putting that out there. He looks like he would have made a great James Bond.
He's too burly for Bond, I think. Not sleek enough. Yeah.
But like the last Bond was a brute, which is why it was so good.
I don't think he was too much of a brute.
All right, let me pull us back.
Royale?
Let me pull us back into the scene here.
Sorry.
So one thing I wanted to say.
My mind's all over the place now. Yeah.
You should write for Game of Thrones. So I was going to say another thing. I'm another fourth wall breaking one, which I'm glad. I am so thankful they did not go this route, because so many people had theorized that at the end of this we'd end up with a democracy, which would be sort of ridiculous if you went from straight monarchy to democracy, right? Like a full republic democracy, representational, right? I think that the way they did it, where it was still the lords and ladies choosing, is a good way of sort of making progress but not reaching the goal. But but one thing, when they had Sam stand up and say, why doesn't everybody choose, right? I was literally shaking, like, don't do this, don't make this happen this way. And I was so glad. I think that was another I think that that was another fourth wall breaking moment where they had everyone laugh, you know.
I don't think it is. I think Sam has the only experience Sam has of elevating anyone into a position of power and leadership
is the Night Watch, sure.
At the Night's Watch, and that is very democratic. It's votes, and then rounds of votes and different. He had to do a lot of like running around. Yeah, campaigning for John and manipulating.
So for the record, I'm not saying that that's not an intelligent assertion from Sam. What I'm saying is it would have been really jarring
Yeah.
have in this show the entire kingdom go from a full-on monarchy directly to a representational democracy.
I
It would have
agree.
been sort of ridiculous. So when they laughed him down, I was like, oh, okay, thank God they
Yeah.
did not. They did
I,
not
I,
bite
I can
that one.
I can see the headlines now. Game of Thrones reviewer hates democracy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, American,
That'd be awesome.
especially American Game of
Yeah.
Thrones reviewer.
Burn democracy.
No, I just think that would have been such a poor choice, and I think that moment was them saying like that's sort of a ridiculous idea to make that leap. So I was glad that they had everyone laugh him down. I loved. Oh, I guess I'll just ask my horse, or whatever. That was a great little bit.
Let's talk about the only way that you guys can figure out that that's Howland Reed, if indeed it is. He's not wearing. There's nothing that shows that he's from the Riverlands. Claire, you're lying to me because I looked. But he croaks when he does his eye or whatever. It's like a ribbit. It's like that's the only way that you can tell. He talks like a fucking frog.
Imagine if we were live and someone tuned in 25 seconds ago, and that was the first thing they heard.
I think if you think anyone of any significance that was going to be there that dressed like that, very old, kind of raggedy and
it wasn't that bad. I went and looked. I was like, no, that's pretty standard, and there's no worms or lizards or other shit around him. I paid good attention. He just when he makes his answer, it sounds like a croak, and that's the only thing that can make that Howland Reed. Because aren't they supposed to sound like a little bit lizardy too, or froggy?
In your head canon,
I was just gonna say, I wish I could live a day in MP's mind, just one day. Just
I get so many people that tell me that. Everybody's invited, by the way. Yeah. Honestly, you're probably
it's already.
Anyway.
I was gonna say it's already so jam packed with other voices. I don't know if it would be good for me to hop in.
Been there, done that. Got the lifetime ban.
Okay, let's move on swiftly before we
Talk about breaking the fourth wall. Jeez.
Yep.
All right.
But can I just say before we move on to the Council of Nepotism at the end, that another thing that really didn't make sense, Yara caving in.
I was about to bring that up too.
Prince of Dawn, whoever the
no, just call him the new Prince of Dawn.
I just can't get over the fact that they didn't protest straight away, especially because Sansa did that. The best meme for this, Sansa like smashing the Brexit button immediately.
Yeah, I love that.
It's like, we're out of here. We're out of here. Is that okay with you? Yeah, gone. That was So, but they just took it. They just said, aye. And
I also liked that one that meme where it was after Sansa says we're gonna leave, it shows Yara and the new Prince of Dawn being like, wait, that's an option.
That's what I was gonna say too. Is that meme? That's another good one. It's actually weird that she doesn't go for that. Given
it doesn't make any sense, right?
No.
The only thing I could say is maybe with the Iron Islands, because where Yara was going with the Iron Islands was she was trying to bring them into a more modern sort of mentality in regards to enough of the reaving and the raiding. Let's become part of the kingdom. Let's actually be part of, the wealth and the, she wanted to move people to the mainland and farm and all this stuff. So at least that's how I remember it. So
your brother,
that's a great point.
Has just killed my queen. You've now given your sister her own queendom. What the actual fucking you're expecting me to say? Aye. Oh, okay then. Aye.
Yep.
She's supposed to be the queen of the Iron Islands. It just that could have spent a little bit more time on that.
Yep.
And out of all the characters we know, Yara probably knows the least about Bran. So when they're like, "Oh, he's Bran, he's the world's memory," she's like, "What the fuck are they talking about?"
That's the thing. Why would those lords vote aye for Bran? Like, what has Bran done? This is the thing. Like, we as viewers know that Bran's supposed to represent everyone's story. He has the best story because he has everyone's story. Yada yada yada. These characters don't know what Bran's done. He's done fuck all as far as they're concerned. Yet they're quite happy to be able to die. It's just,
Paralyzed kid, yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely see Sam and Davos and Sansa and all those people, but yeah, it's certainly Robin, Aaron, Yara,
Yeah, you just-
Greyjoy, the new Prince of Dorne. Like, what are these people doing? You
So
know?
everybody's just like, oh, by the way, you guys, so this guy over here can see everything and know everything. You're just, oh, really? Okay, cool.
Super
Yeah.
magic boy.
But
Yeah.
it also seemed like what was real weak sauce was, is there anybody better? Look to your left, look to your right, what you know. Anyone else that just, okay, all right, yeah, I will go with you. That's kind of how it was shoehorned in, and it was shit.
Yeah.
the worst thing as well, he still doesn't do it. Maybe this is the point, but in that last council meeting, he was again fucking useless. He doesn't do anything. He's done
Yeah.
for the past like 5 seasons. I swear. Maybe that's the point. He's a king in name only. He's a figurehead, when in actual fact the council rule. Maybe that's what they're going for.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go now and find Drogon. Oh well, thanks for that.
Yeah,
Thanks for not showing us where Drogon goes. By the way, you just go off and do it by yourself.
Can you imagine if your queen did this kind of thing?
If anybody that watches this later on is feeling ambitious or not, they should email this to Dan and Dave, or send it to them somehow. I want them to watch.
They're too busy now. They've moved on to other projects.
The show doesn't matter.
They're going to go and ruin Star Wars now, even though that's already started. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there's not much they can do wrong there. They might actually make it better.
All right.
I don't think so.
One more thing before the this is just a small little tidbit, but before the council meeting, there was, I thought, a cool little line from Arya where she says, "What's west of Westeros?" And Jon says, like, "I don't know," and she says, "No one knows." I just wanted to throw that out there. I thought that was a cool little nod.
Gotcha.
So
no one
knows.
Yeah.
Yep.
The Westeros.
The Westeros.
This is a
I got
throw to, there is a story in Fire and Blood where another female adventurer goes west of Westeros.
Really?
Is her name Christine Columbus?
No, it's Alice Farman, and she was. Yeah, well, you honestly read it. It's
I
interesting.
know we got to read that and review that too.
We're going to review that as a force.
Yeah, definitely. Now, shall we talk about what was, in my opinion, my least favorite scene?
Yeah,
the small
Sure.
council meeting. I just want to. I'll just quickly throw my thoughts on this. First of all, it was Tyrion like rearranging the chairs was like a cool little scene. I enjoyed that moment, and I actually think I might disagree with you, Claire. I think based on what you said earlier, I actually think Davos makes perfect sense to me. Brienne makes perfect sense to me. Sam makes perfect sense to me, given that he actually is doing his Maester stuff. Who am I missing there in the?
Bronn.
Yeah, I'm getting to that one. There was someone else I think too. Maybe not. Maybe that's it. And Tyrion as the Hand of the King, obviously. Every single one of those characters fits that role and fits it extremely well, except for one fucking person. One person in that room made no sense to me. And because I shouted about this in the last episode, or the episode before that, how ridiculous it is. The idea that you would put Bronn in charge of one of the most important regions in the entire continent and expect things to go well. So we've broken the wheel and then we set it back up. I don't understand why Bronn is still alive, why he's in charge of Highgarden, and I will say this as my final criticism of Bronn. First of all, I've enjoyed Bronn, but I feel like I've mentioned this before, he did a reverse development. He went from being a character with some dimensions to being one-dimensional. He went the opposite route. They turned him into a trope.
Same as Tommen.
Yes, exactly. That's how I feel about Tormund as well.
Tormund a bit more, I think. But
But both characters I loved, and now I couldn't stand either of them by the end of it. With Bronn, though, if they had had him in that council meeting, actually showing some amount of competence and actually showing some amount of care for the position that he's in now, I would have been so much happier. But instead, they still had him making dick and fart jokes. Okay, so it just pissed, that
that's a
whole
fair
thing
point. You end on a fair
pissed
point.
me off. Everyone belonged in there except for him, and that's it.
Although I
That's
do have to go back, remember way back, and I don't know which season it was, but when Bronn got knighted and he was in court and he was actually all dressed sophisticated and stuff like that. So I think he is adaptable.
Is MP robotic for anyone else? Or is
No.
that just me? No?
No,
Okay.
it sounds fine.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyways, go
I
on. That's
think
all I
there
have to
was
say about that. I'll be right back.
there was somebody else who I thought was slightly misplaced on that council of nepotism. And that's Brienne. I was about, oh, come on, you've got to explain that a little bit, because you made a sworn oath to the Starks, to Lady Catelyn, and then there was this big scene where she was, she swore a sword to Sansa, and now suddenly she's Kingsguard. So
I think my take on that is she